Hey, you. Yes, you, the listener. Before we start the show, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. Producer Head only exists because of supporters like you who take this one simple action. It costs nothing and means everything to us as we continue to build this community together and bring in more and more top tier producers to share what they know directly with us. The bigger our community grows, the more we can all level up together. All right, I appreciate you. Now let's get into it. Yo, what's up? This is Toru, music producer, entrepreneur, and host of this show, Producer Head. Welcome to my conversation with Tom Glendenning, aka ELPHNT, a producer, educator, and creator based in London. ELPHNT has built a remarkable career bridging the worlds of music production and education. Known for his innovative Ableton Live tools, comprehensive tutorials, and thoughtful approach to music making, he's become a trusted voice in the producer community. From his minimalistic production philosophy to his successful online business, ELPHNT represents the modern producer who creates not just music, the tools and knowledge that elevate the entire community. With that, please enjoy my conversation with ELPHNT. What's up, everybody? This is Toru, and in a way, so are you. Welcome back to another episode of Producer Head. Very, very excited to let you know who we have on the show today, Tom Glendenning, aka ELPHNT. Welcome, man.
Thanks for having me, and nice job on the surname pronunciation there. Not everybody nails it, so.
Did I do okay? I actually meant to ask you that beforehand, just to be sure. And as I was doing it, I was like,
No,
here we go.
you got it perfectly. It was great.
Thank you, man. Yeah, a little leap of faith. So, yeah, man. Again, keeping our international vibe alive, coming straight to us all the way from
London.
There we go.
London, England.
Yeah, man. Thanks so much. And so it's just spoke to somebody we're based in Tokyo, so it's been
nice.
really fun to kind of to schedule these and get to have that kind of difference in time. This time I get to be fresh off my coffee, so I'm a little bit more excited for that.
Nice. Yeah, coming at you from London, England, but also representing South Africa. Got to give a shout out. So
very cool. I didn't realize that. Are you from South Africa originally?
Yeah, I've been in the UK now for 6 years, but yeah, from South Africa originally.
Very cool. Right on. So I want to talk to you a little bit about your philosophy to making music, and before, I would love for you to just share your own, but also like maybe preface that, like, how important do you think it is to have a conscious philosophy as a musician?
I mean, I think it is and it isn't important. I think, yeah, I mean, I think thinking about it is not necessarily something that everyone necessarily needs to do, but whether you think about it or not, I think everybody has a personal approach to making music. It's just whether you're kind of consciously aware of it, and whether that's useful or not, I don't know. But I know I find for myself, and it's just the way I am in music making. I'm very process oriented, and again, like going back to that broadcast track that we listened to, the thing that fascinates me is about the process and like how did they create those sounds? What were they doing? What pedals were they working with? Were they chopping up tape, or like what was their process to get there? So I'm just inherently interested in process, and I think not everyone is necessarily as interested in process as I am, and I don't think that's kind of one way or the other. But I think it can be something that's quite useful to look at your own process and think about what are the sort of tropes and things that you kind of always go to or come back to, and that just sort of helps you. I know, at least I know for me, it's helped me be a lot more confident in the music that I make. So when I do sit down to make music, I kind of know roughly the direction I'm going to go in. I know the kinds of sounds I want to use. I know the kinds of approaches I'm going to take and the kinds of processes I'm going to use. Yeah, so it just sort of makes me more confident in my own process. I mean, in terms of what those are for me, it's very personal. So it's definitely will differ from person to person. But like, I'm very much into kind of minimalism, keeping things really simple, and like kind of less. The concept of less is more. Like having less elements in a song or in a production, but going a lot deeper with those. Again, like coming back to this idea of like tonal characteristics. Instead of having 5 different sounds, have one sound, but just really spend a lot of time getting that sound sounding really rich and full and deep and have lots of texture and sort of interest to it. It is just sort of very much something. And then experimentation is always just part of kind of what I do. again, maybe to my detriment sometimes because I spend too much time experimenting and less time like actually finishing stuff. But I'm always sort of exploring and trying new things and looking for new ways of approaching the same things. Um, so those kind of two things are very much core to my philosophy of making music.
Are you when you sit down? Is there typically something you hear in your head that you're trying to make real, or are you sitting down and just experimenting until something kind of grabs you?
Very rarely is it the first one. There are
Mm.
like probably like I could probably count on two hands the number of times where I've like had an idea, sat down and put that idea down, and then that idea actually became a finished track. Like I've
Mm.
definitely had times where I've had an idea, got it down, and then it probably went nowhere. But actually having an idea in my head and then becoming a finished track is very, very rare. Most of the time, for me, it's just a matter of sitting down and experimenting, trying things, loading up a synth and being like, what have I not done with this synthesizer or this sampler, or where can I get a cool sample source? And that'll just like spark a little something. Oh, that sounds interesting, or a melody will emerge, and then kind of following that sort of path. Um,
How do you encourage somebody who's like, I'm not going to get in the studio today because I don't feel inspired?
so there is a quote that I love by Jack White. I'm sure everybody has at least heard of the artist Jack White of the White Stripes. There's a great documentary about the White Stripes called Under Great White Northern Lights, I think, which kind of follows them on tour, and it's like a really interesting look into behind the scenes. He's a real fascinating dude in terms of his like approach to music. But he, before he was a musician, he used to be an upholsterer, just as like a day job. He would upholster
Mm.
chairs and things. And the quote that he gives is, "When you're an upholsterer, you don't come in and think, oh, today I'm not inspired to like upholster this chair. It's you just show up and you upholster the chair, and maybe you don't do a great job, but you know, you show up and you do the job and you just do that every day." And so I can hear Jack White in my head every time I sit down. If I'm not inspired, it's like you just got to sit down and just upholster the chair. You just got to do it every day, even if you're not inspired, and something will happen. It might not, like quite often, it's not anything good, but if you don't, you're just never gonna upholster the chair. So that quote plays on repeat in my head a lot.
I had no idea about the documentary. I'm definitely going to look that up. And I'm a Jack White is really. I just saw him for the first time a few months ago, and I did not realize because in a lot of stuff I've listened to him, I don't know. I didn't realize like what a guitar player he is, and
Oh
like in
yeah,
what an old school kind of style. I mean, it was an incredible show. I couldn't believe like how kind of blown away I was by it,
yeah.
and I can't recommend enough too. There's an interview that I listened to. He was on Questlove Supreme a while back, and an incredible interview, man. He's just such a cool guy. And I've listened. I went to
Mhm.
Third Man Records once when I was in Nashville. I visited that little space. Yeah, man. He's just a really, really cool guy, and really,
Yeah,
I think a great example of somebody who does his own thing.
well, he very much to me like speaks to me in the way that I really enjoy the process of things. Like he definitely is
Mm,
somebody who is all about the process. I mean, like Third Man, what he does with Third Man is all about the process of the
hmm
music, and like where he does the live vinyl pressings and like you record and you straight onto vinyl. It's all
hmm
about that process of creating it in the moment and creating things on the fly and like doing it live. I mean, there's other like that documentary that Under Great White Northern Lights. There's lots of good stuff in there. Another one we'll maybe get to talking about like live performance stuff at some point. But he talks about how when he's on stage, he likes to make things hard for himself. He also
mm,
like in the White Stripes, he was playing guitar and he was playing organ, and he's like, I want to put the organ just a little bit too far away from me. So when I want to go play, I've got to go play organ. I've got to like really get there really quickly and jump to get the organ, where I want to like make sure that the guitar is like just a little bit out of tune. So when I play, I've got to work a little bit harder to like play it and get it sounding just right. And that is just there's just something about that that's just really enjoyable to watch. Just seeing somebody like working really hard and putting in all this kind of intention and effort. He is full of just great inspirational creative quotes.
yeah, his attention to detail, I feel like is kind of what you described. Yeah, it's that's really cool to hear. So let's say you've jumped over the hurdle and you got into the studio, but now you're stuck. What do you How do you talk to yourself in those situations?
When I'm stuck, I think I've become very rational. I definitely wasn't always this way. I think it's something I've kind of developed over the years, is just kind of being really rational with myself about, okay, I'm stuck, something's not flowing here. What are some steps I can take to still be here upholstering the chair, but like get back to a new place? Do I need to start a new session? Should I try a different sound? What are some practical approaches I can do to just like get something fresh, rather than just like constantly banging my head against the wall trying to come up with something? And I don't always catch myself. Sometimes you spend a bunch of time just banging away trying to get something to work and it just doesn't work. But yeah, I tend to, when I get stuck, sort of go to a bit of a rational place of like, what are some really practical things I can do to get myself out of this?
How did you develop that awareness to kind of approach it that way, as opposed to being like frustrated, for example?
Probably just a lot of practice. There was definitely a good period where there was a lot of frustration. I think probably an important thing for me was discovering Brian Eno's oblique cards. For anyone's not familiar with those, so hopefully you know who Brian Eno is. If you're a music producer and you don't know who Brian Eno is, you got some homework to do. It's a renowned music producer who I bumped into on the street once and made an absolute fool of myself because I was just like a bumbling fan. But he has this thing that he put out called oblique cards, which is literally a pack of physical cards. But on the cards, it's basically ideas to help you get unstuck. And on these cards, there'll be like sometimes pretty weird kind of suggestions. Maybe a more normal one would be go outside the room, shut the door, and listen from outside. And then how does that change your perspective? Some of them can be pretty abstract, like I can't think of any off the top of my head. You can find, like, if you just search online just for oblique cards, there's like online versions of them. And the idea is you take this pack of cards and you shuffle it up and you just draw one. And then that's cool. Here's an idea to try that'll get you unstuck. So I think kind of when I initially discovered those, that was quite a revelation for me, because it's like, oh, so when I'm stuck, I can be quite practical. And there's like a procedure of like, let me just try an idea. Let's try this thing. And it can be totally random. It can be, I'm going to lie on the floor in my studio and listen and hear what happens. Or I'm going to put a filter on it and filter out all the highs and only listen to the bass. And how does that make me hear things differently? Yeah, just kind of finding really pragmatic approaches to getting unstuck. I then sort of, the oblique cards are cool, but they can be very oblique sometimes. They can be pretty out there. So I ended up making, for myself, I made this tool in Ableton Live, which I just called Inspire, which is exactly the same concept. It's just like a plugin that works inside of Ableton. But you just click it and it gives you a random suggestion. But I made them a little bit more kind of practical and less oblique. So it might be something like use subtractive synthesis, or use a sample, or try adding a new track, or use a polyrhythm, or go onto YouTube and sample something. And that's like become my absolute go-to. I maybe rely on it a little too much. It can become a crutch at times, where if I get stuck, I'm just like, fire that up, randomize, and it gives me a thing. It's like, cool, let's try that. Let's see if that gets me unstuck.
That's so cool that I've never heard of these cards. We're definitely going to link those in the show notes so people can see them. And obviously to your site and all the tools that you have. But that's a cool way to, especially in your case, to literally kind of almost in a sense be talking to yourself, and to like have that voice that reminds you to just, I don't know, to kind of stay in motion a little bit, right? And be action oriented about stuff. Instead of like stewing on being stuck, you're just like, okay, what can I try? And just in that process of trying something, you're at least not allowing yourself to kind of sink into a hole where you're kind of like, I don't know what to do.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like in making music, there's like kind of this at least two sides, right? There's a technical and an artistic side, kind of like the artist or like the poet and then the scientist, you know? And I'm wondering like how you think about those two things as you make music.
I think I try to separate them as much as possible. For me, that's can be quite difficult because I'm inherently just a very technical person. Again, coming back to that process, I'm really interested in sort of how things work. But I try to, as much as possible when I'm making music, separate out, and I do this with a lot of processes actually, is try to separate out different processes and like different focuses, if you will. So if I'm sitting down to make music, I'm sitting down to make music. I'm not worried about designing new sounds. I'm not worried about, oh, there's like a tool I've had an idea for that could really be really useful right now. And when I don't sort of catch myself, I'll sit down to make music and it'll be like, oh, it'd be really cool if I had like a Max for Live tool that did this. And then like an hour later, I've like built a Max for Live tool and not done any music. that's the bad side of it when I get distracted. But what I try to do is keep those processes separate. So like a good example might be something like sound design is quite a technical process. It can be creative as well, but instead of sitting down to make a song and then opening up a blank preset and thinking like, okay, what kind of sound do I want? I'll have separate sessions where this is just a sound design session. For an hour, I'm not making music. I'm not worried about song structure. I'm not worried about melodies or chords or anything. I'm just going to make sounds for an hour and then stick those in a folder. And so when I do have a music making session, I've got those sounds there. You sort of apply that to a lot of different things, like getting my studio organized or my plugin folder, whatever it is. It's a very technical process. How do I categorize and label things? That happens totally separately. So that when I sit down to make music, I can just kind of flow. So for me, that's, yeah, is trying as much as possible to separate the technical and the creative processes. I'm just remembering now a concept that I heard many years ago. And I think there's a talk on it by John Cleese of Monty Python, if anyone's familiar with that, about this concept of open mode and closed mode. And you can sort of roughly translate that to the adage that I'm sure everybody's heard of: write drunk, edit sober. It's kind of along the same lines of this sort of separating the technical and the creative. So the open mode is like this very creative mode when you're in the flow and you're creating things. And then the closed mode is when you're like very technical, doing like tidying up your session or doing some admin or getting organized. And as soon as you kind of start to become aware of it, you definitely notice that you'll go through periods of being in either this open mode or this closed mode. And when you're in the closed mode, trying to be open and creative is when you kind of get into those stuck periods. And if you're in the open mode and you suddenly try to be technical and go into the closed mode, you lose that creative sort of spark or that flow. And you obviously need to have both, but being aware of when you're in one and when you're in the other. When are you in this open mode and you're being creative and you're just like making new things and trying things out and exploring? And then when are you in this more closed technical mode that is more about getting things organized, being sort of practical, or and in a music context, that's like things like, I don't know, organizing your sessions or getting new plugins or finding samples or whatever it is. That's a very different process to actually like writing music.
Yeah, so I feel like what you're describing is sort of an intentionality around the way that you're going to spend your time in a particular session as you approach a particular project, understanding maybe what stage you're in. And am I writing and creating, or am I editing? What I'm wondering is, let's say you're in the close mode and you're in editing mode, and something strikes you and you get an idea that's more so in that other mode. How do you know when to kind of ignore that and remain in that place, or when do you or to follow that? Actually, I know that I said I was in closed mode, but this is something that I'll break this for.
I think it's just a balance that you kind of learn to pick up on. Like, I know for me, the most common thing is when I'm in this open mode, creative mode, and I'm working on a piece of music, and something comes up where I'm like, oh, I could really use like a Max for Live tool, or I want to install a new plugin to do this, or I want to do some sound design. And I have to, like, sometimes if I'm at a point where I've maybe hit a slump creatively, I'm like, this doesn't really be going anywhere. Let me just like change course. I'm going to go just try and work on a Max device, or I'm going to go and sort my samples for a bit. And that sort of comes back to, I guess, what you were talking about earlier about getting unstuck. Is sometimes when you're stuck, you're just stuck, and that's fine, and just change it up entirely. So there are times when that is really the case. But there's other times where it's like, no, I'm really in a good creative flow now. I can feel this is going somewhere good. I'm not going to distract myself by suddenly organizing my sample library. And I think it's just a matter of practice, figuring out when to follow one or to kind of change course.
If somebody were to look at your Ableton, what is it about the way that your folders or your files are structured that makes it you?
I'm laughing because I think most people would look at my Ableton and think I'm a bit of a nut job. I'm like, I'm pretty pretty organized with my stuff. I think it's just part of my personality that I like to have things kind of neat and tidy and straight lines and all kind of organized. So yeah, if someone looks at my Ableton project, they'll see that everything is just perfectly neatly labeled and in the right place, and then they'll know it's me.
Is there something maybe that you organize or label to an extent that maybe you think a lot of people overlook or a lot of us don't do that potentially offers like a way to be super helpful in whether it's an open or closed mode?
I mean, I think, I don't know, not to be facetious, but just doing it in the first place. I think I have the perspective of getting to work with a lot of, just through teaching, getting to work with a lot of different artists and creatives. And the first step is actually just doing it, is getting a bit organized. The number of times I'll have a session with someone, and the thing that's kind of getting them caught up is they're trying to be creative, and then suddenly they get to this point where the tool that they really need at that particular moment, is not available for them because they just haven't done the work to organize it. Or they, like, a really kind of common example, which I think every music producer can relate to, is like, I'm working on a track. Okay, I need a kick drum sound. I'm gonna go and like look in my sample folder of kick drums, and then half an hour later you've paged through 200 kick drums and you still haven't found your kick drum. Maybe a better way to approach that is you have a separate session where it's like, let me pick 10 of my favorite drum sounds, go-to drum sounds, and you just organize that into folders where you've got 10 kicks, 10 snares, or whatever it is, 10 of your favorite synth sounds. Like in Ableton, for example, and different DAWs might handle this differently, but in Ableton you have these things called collections. Also now in the most recent version of Ableton, you have tags, but collections work pretty well for this, where you just right click on a particular item in your browser and you can add it to a collection. So just literally something as simple as taking a session to go through everything. You go through all your plugins, go through the built-in presets, your samples, and just tag stuff. Just say, I like this sound, I don't like this sound. Create a little bank of favorites. That makes just a world of difference in your workflow. And again, in this sort of idea of being in open mode versus closed mode, the last thing you want when you're in open mode is to get distracted, because now you've got to dig through the 5,000 presets that came with your DAW to find the one that you like, and then you've lost your creativity. So I think I'm very much the logical extreme of where you can go with organizing. I probably do a little bit too much of what you need to. So I wouldn't recommend necessarily everybody follows as much organizing as I do, but actually just kind of a basic level of getting things organized and finding a way that works for you, but making it so that the things that you need are relatively within reach.
I believe in organization deeply as like a way to just kind of in the same, just to try to like kind of reduce the amount of space between whatever you're thinking and what you want to do, how you want to kind of realize that. But I can say with, I think, pretty strong level of certainty that I'm not as organized as you. So
just last thing on that note, which I'll just add, was I'm endlessly surprised. I did several years ago, I did a live stream on, I think I called the name of the live stream was Get Organized and Improve Your Workflow in Ableton Live. And it was basically like, this live stream was about like how the browser works in Ableton and how file management works. And I was like, this is the most boring subject. No one's going to be interested in this. And to this day, it is probably one of my most watched videos. It's like an hour-long live stream as well, and the number of people who comment on that, like, this video has helped me so much. I was just so surprised at how much people really need some kind of guidance or want to find a way of organizing things. So
we'll be sure to link that. I'm assuming it's on your YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Cool. Yeah, we'll go ahead and link that for everybody just in case to have that stick out. But yeah, I mean, I can say, man, I mean, as somebody who's been aware of your work for a long time, I mean, I haven't watched that particular video, but I've watched, like, for instance, when the newest version of Live came out, I was like, I want to go to your page and see what you said about the new features, you know? So you're somebody who I trust for those kinds of things, for sure.
Awesome. Glad to hear it.
So respond to this for me, man. I kind of have this sense of that, like, learning without doing is sort of like hypothetical learning. And I'm wondering how that lands for you.
I mean, yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think you can sort of sit and watch all the video tutorials you want, or do all the courses you want, or read all the textbooks or whatever it is. And then you can sit down at your DAW after having watched 2,000 tutorials and still have no clue what you're doing. It's only when you actually put that stuff into practice and then put it into practice again, and then again, and then again, 100,000 times, that stuff really starts to kind of get ingrained. I think there's definitely, obviously, both are important, But yeah, for me, learning is doing. There's definitely a large amount of just doing something over and over again that is essential to really learning how to do something.
Producer Head listeners, this one is for you. We hooked up with ELPHNT to get 25% off any of his Ableton Live packs. On top of that, any purchase will automatically include his Gen Pack for free. If you're interested, you can take advantage of this at elephant.io/producerhead. There is no code needed. If you tap in at elephant.io/producerhead, choose your pack, you will see the discount applied automatically at checkout and the Gen Pack included. elephant.io/producerhead, and we will link this in the show notes as well. All right, let's get back to the episode.
Yeah, and so I think it's sort of this balance of, consumption versus production, right? You want to take in some new information at some point, but to your point, if you don't, it's like kind of the repetition of applying it in different ways that actually kind of helps it develop as some kind of skill or ability. And I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts on like good ways to think about I kind of almost think about it as a diet, right? Like you consume, you eat, and then you kind of internalize that and use it to produce. And I think there is a lot of us, like, because of all of the stuff available, that maybe even subconsciously we approach it sort of like, in a matrix kind of way. You watch all these things and you think you're going to know kung fu after you watch all these videos, but you've kind of like maybe overindulged in all this, and now you don't like have any, you know what I mean? And so there's too much jumbling around in there. So, how do you think about creating like a good balance between consumption and production in learning specifically?
Yeah. I liked your Matrix reference. If only life were that easy, you could just watch a video and then kung fu. That would be great. I think a good example for me on this front is always compression, because compression, it encapsulates this concept so nicely. Compression is one of those things that you can be told how compression works or how a compressor works. You can be told what all the controls do, what attack does, what release does, what threshold does. You can watch hundreds of videos on it. But, and again, this is something that I sort of have the benefit of experience of working with a lot of students. Not a single person I've ever met has figured out what a compressor does without just literally spending, and a compressor is a particularly difficult thing to really understand, spending like hundreds of hours just compressing things until it finally sort of clicks. But I think to answer your question about where the balance is I think you want to sort of start off with a kind of overview kind of type. And this is generally my approach when I sort of learn new things, is let me get a big overview. And let's use a compressor as an example. I'm going to watch a video on what are all the elements in a compressor. Somebody's going to explain to me, this is what attack does, this is what release does, threshold, ratio, etc. And I might get a basic idea of what these things, like the general direction that they are, or the things that they're used for, but I don't quite know the specifics yet. At that point, go and sit and just play, explore, take what you kind of think you've learned and try to put it into practice. Let me go and tweak the ratio control, and can I hear what that's doing? Okay, maybe I can kind of hear it, but I'm not entirely sure. Play around with other things and do that for a good little while until you get to a point where you're like, okay, cool. I'm kind of understanding it, but I need to refine it a bit better. And then maybe go watch another video, watch the same video again, or read an article, or whatever, that shows some more examples. And then you'll have sort of all that information of what you've just applied and the practical stuff that you've just done, and the experience that you have of, when I tweaked the attack control, I thought I heard this, but like I wasn't really sure if that's what it was doing. And then you watch the video and then it kind of reinforces of either, no, I had it totally wrong, it wasn't doing that thing that I thought it was doing, or yeah, I was heading in the right direction when I was trying to figure out what the attack control does. And then you go back and apply that again. So I think there's a constant kind of bouncing back and forth of learning something, doing something theoretical, and then applying it. And there's no hard and fast formula, but what I can definitely say is you probably need to be spending more time in the practical than in the theoretical, I think. I don't think there's you should be spending 5 times as much practicing as you are doing theoretical. I don't know if there's like a neat little formula for that. But if you're spending more time in the theory and the less time in the doing, you're definitely just not gonna get better. You've got to just sit down and spend a lot of time putting that stuff into practice, I think.
No, that's really cool. I feel like you kind of describe this like taking some information, make an assessment, and like as a way to sort of test yourself and try to measure yourself, like consciously as you're testing, be conscious of what it is that you're like, try to almost like talk to yourself, maybe even write it down. This is what I think is happening, so that you can actually have a record of like your progress or like the path of your understanding, which is really cool.
Yeah. I mean, I think a way to think about it is just to use like an analogy. And this just comes to mind because I'm also really into basketball. But if you think of like a basketball player shooting free throws, you could sit on the side of the court and you could analyze every single aspect of the physics of free throw, how much strength you got to put, what angle you got to shoot, and you could know all of that. And then you step up to the free throw line and you're like, oh, my arm is not physically strong enough to throw the ball, or whatever it is. Or, oh, I haven't accounted for the fact that I need to just aim with my left hand and shoot with my right, whatever it is. There'll be some element that you didn't account for, and suddenly when you get into the practical, you're like, okay, cool. And now I know when I go back to the theory, this is what I got to think about. Okay, cool. I've like done this a couple times. I could see every time I shot, it was going to the right of the basket. What does that mean? How do I adjust that? And then you go back to the theory and you sort of think and you analyze it a bit, and then you apply that adjustment. Yeah. So sort of same for anything, really.
And yeah, I appreciate that you use the compressor as an example. I guess just because it's probably the second most or equally as used. Can you speak similarly about EQ?
So EQ, I find like definitely clicks a lot better or a lot quicker with people. It's compression just is that thing that like I'm sure everybody who now understands compression has been through that experience of like just having no clue like what's really happening until eventually it clicks. I think it took me years to like really truly understand what a compressor does. EQ is a little bit more straightforward because I think it's a lot more obvious what happens. And I know from teaching somebody how an EQ works, it's like here I can pick a frequency and I can turn it up. And I can turn it up really loud, and you can hear that is really bright. Or I can pick a frequency around 300 hertz and pull it all the way down, and you can really clearly hear like, okay, what's happening. So for something like EQ, I think getting the like fundamentals of how it works is relatively easy. But in the same way, though, to like really master something like EQ, it is just practice, because I can show you that example. I can show you when I've got a guitar, if I just crank 1 kilohertz and you can hear, okay, that's what happens. I'm turning up the volume of this particular frequency. But then I give you a bass guitar and you're like, well, what do I do with this? How do I EQ? What do I do here? So again, that's where with something like EQ, understanding the sort of way that it works is relatively easy, and you can put that into practice relatively quickly. But then the complexity comes with understanding where you use it, and how it might work on different kinds of sounds, or how it works in a mix versus hearing something in isolation. And that, again, is just something that only comes with practice. The only way you're going to learn how to EQ a bass guitar is to EQ a bunch of bass guitars. If you've never EQ'd a bass guitar before, you're probably not going to know how to EQ a bass guitar.
In something that's as kind of broad and vast as music production and making music, how do you think about maybe creating kind of, shorter laps or shorter versions of, I guess, like maybe think about it almost as exercises or ways to kind of condense and get deeper on those little things that you can learn along the way, so that overall your water level rises in terms of what you're capable of doing?
Again, I think it's the same answer. It's maybe not the answer that everyone wants to hear, but I think it is just the practice. You just got to do it over and over again. And like, as you say, in a field as vast as music production, there are a bass guitar is one of thousands of different kinds of sounds that you're gonna have to EQ. But you do kind of eventually learn to sort of generalize those concepts. So different genres, you're gonna have different approaches to how you might mix a track, or how you might EQ different kinds of instruments, or what you're trying to achieve. But again, it's just a matter of the more you do it, the more you kind of understand the concept in a general way. So like, again, and I sort of think of those, which I really dislike them, but you get those charts, there's like EQ charts, where it's like cut here to remove mud and cut here to add brightness. it's a good place to start because it's very general,
Mm.
and it will give you like a good overall understanding of what EQ is and what it does. But then it's only with practice that you just slowly refine that and get much more kind of detailed and start to understand, oh, when I boost this frequency, it's going to kind of behave this way across different kinds of instruments, or it's going to behave this way on drums versus on a bass guitar or on a synthesizer or whatever it is. Yeah. And so it's literally just only with the experience of having done it that you'll kind of learn that.
Yeah, and then to what extent, is it important in your mind to follow and also to be conscious of maybe breaking rules? Like maybe sometimes because of what we're doing and maybe because of a video we watch or our understanding of what a particular device is intended to be used for, when to throw that out and say, you know what, I'm going to do this. And even though maybe it's not what's generally prescribed.
I mean, I think in the realm of music specifically, there's another quote that I love, which I can't remember what it was from, but it was a documentary that I once watched, and it was Ray Charles. He was talking about some kind of production thing, and he just says, if it sounds good, it sounds good. And it's like, that's one of those things that I also always just hear on loop in my head is, if you want to break the rules, if you break the rules and like it sounds bad, then you're like, well, I'm not going to do that. But if you break the rules and you think, this sounds really cool, I like this. This is not, I've used this compressor in this weird way, but it's really working for me, then stick with it. Go with it and just kind of do that. And I think the beauty of breaking the rules is you can do that at any stage. You can have no idea how a compressor works, but you can load it up, chuck in a preset, tweak a couple controls, and think, oh, that sounds pretty cool, and then kind of run with it. I think of like the example of something like OTT. With, if anyone's familiar with the concept of OTT, basically the way it started is there was a preset in Ableton's multiband compressor called OTT, which is like just obscene multiband compression, like, which is probably not, if you sat down with a multiband compressor, it's not really what you would use it for. OTT stands for over the top. And then it's since become like this thing where there's now plugins that are just do OTT compression, but because it sounds really good. It sounds good on, well, it doesn't always sound good. Sometimes it sounds not so good, but you know when it sounds not so good and you know when it sounds good, and then you just kind of run with it.
I guess I want to ask you at least quickly about performance a little bit, because I think in the producer community, I think there's like a little bit, you're not a traditional or conventional musician. Maybe you don't play a conventional instrument and you're intimidated by performing and you want to make it interesting. What are some ideas or some advice to kind of approach that?
I mean, have we got another 3 hours? This is something that it's, performance, particularly around sort of electronic music, is something that I've kind of just deeply thought about on a philosophical level for so many years, because it's something that is still not quite answered in my mind. It's tricky coming from the background of being a traditional musician, where as a drummer, it's really easy to perform because I hit something, it makes a sound, and you see me hit the thing, you see it make a sound. It's really obvious, it's really physical, it's easy to perform. And so I guess when I think about electronic performance in particular, the thing that makes a performance is as an audience. That's the difference between being in the studio and being on a stage. Is, well, depending on where you are. Sometimes I've played some shows where there was barely an audience, and you just have to imagine that there's an audience there. But the key idea is that you're trying to have some kind of relationship with these people that are watching what you're doing. And so to a certain degree, like, a performance is about making yourself feel good about what you're doing, but then also making the audience feel good about what you're doing. And that can manifest in like a number of different ways. And then electronic music in particular is finding ways to make something visual. I think that like the default seems to be with most electronic music is literally visuals. You have a big screen behind you that projects some kind of visuals. Seems to be the way that a lot of people kind of go. And that can be a really interesting thing to do, particularly if you're maybe a slightly nervous performer. So a band that I used to play in, we were like an audiovisual band, and we'd project over ourselves because we felt like we could just kind of hide behind the visuals and we'd disappear a bit. And people were watching that, they weren't watching us too much, so we could do our little nerdy things and no one would be too interested. So that's sort of one approach that you could take. But the other approach is kind of trying to sort of bring the audience in on what you're doing. And a really good example of this, it's a really simple example, is the DJ filter. Like DJs, I've never really been a DJ, but DJs are a really good example to look at in terms of performance, because what a DJ, I think DJs are incredibly skilled at what they do, but a lot of the time what they're doing is not like really big. There's no big obvious thing that the audience sees. Obviously, like when a track that you love comes on, you get hype about it. But the DJ filter is like, it's almost kind of a bit of a meme of like grabbing this knob and like there's elbows flying and you're like really just leaning into this. And the reason that DJs do that is because it's like, oh, you can see what's happening. There's some movement, there's something happening, and then you obviously hear a filter going on top of the track, and you immediately make that connection with the audience, where the audience goes, oh, I can see what's happening. I get it. I see what's happening now. In the same way as when I hit a cymbal and a drum kit, it's like, oh, you see that. See the cymbal and it makes the sound. That makes sense to me. And so thinking of ways, I think particularly when I'm trying to perform, is thinking of ways to bring the audience in on what I'm doing. And whether that's like, you've seen people who perform with controllers and they have it tilted towards the audience. So when you hit a pad, they can see you hitting the pad, is like one way of approaching it and making a performance engaging. A really simple way is to literally just have a traditional instrument on stage with you. One of my favorite artists is an artist called Shigeto, and he's a drummer, and one of the best like live electronic shows I've seen, because he's playing the drums. He's playing a lot of electronic stuff live as well. But by the end of his show, he is like dripping in sweat, and you're like, this guy has really worked to put on this show for you. And so you feel really engaged with what he's doing, and you can visibly see him like making the sounds and doing all of the kinds of things. Yeah, so sort of thinking about that concept of how do I bring the audience in on what I'm doing.
Yeah, I mean, I love, that idea of like, kind of open yourself up and expose yourself to the ability to kind of like let people in and see. I think, oftentimes artists, and I think especially producers that tend to, you spend a lot of time alone. You're maybe somebody who's more reclusive by nature. What advice do you have for people struggling with that kind of fear to kind of open themselves up and expose themselves in that way, or feeling like, well, because I don't play an instrument and I'm just a producer, this isn't, like it's not music in the same way, or it can't be enjoyed live the same way?
Well, the first thing I would say is that's not true. It's definitely not true at all. I've seen some of the most engaging performances I've seen have been producers who are not playing a traditional instrument. I think of one of the best performances I've seen is an artist called Machine Drum. And it was just him on stage. He had a controller, but he like just brought so much energy, and he was engaging. He was kind of almost more of a DJ sort of style set. So that would be the first thing, is to just kind of get rid of that conception that like it's lesser than because there's not like a live instrument. I think you can make it really, really engaging, and there is a lot of skill to it, whatever it is that you might be doing. I think on a practical level, though, like going to what you're saying about, I mean, sort of stage fright, I guess, things like that, is just start, like, let yourself start really small. Do a performance for no one. Do a performance in your bedroom at home, but like set it up like a performance. And if there was an audience here, what am I going to do? Give yourself a really kind of safe environment to practice and get comfortable with it. And there is always going to be, I mean, I've been performing live for 20 years now, probably. And there's definitely still times when I go on stage that I am very nervous to be there in front of people. And it's something that you just kind of work through over time. It takes a while to kind of get comfortable. So again, it's just one of those things that requires a bit of practice. But give yourself like manageable kind of things to do. Get a bunch of friends. So start really small. If you've got a couple friends that like your music, or maybe don't like your music, but tell you that they like your music because they're good friends, ask them to kind of come over and just hang out and say like, hey, can I perform? And keep it really simple as well. Can I just perform one track for you? I've put this thing together. Let me know what you think. And just, yeah, like ease yourself into it is a way that you can kind of do it.
Yeah, that's really cool. Kind of creating an incremental way to grow through something. I guess, how do you think about your own
Yeah, because
evolution
the worst thing to do is
music?
to like to just book a show with 100 people and it's the first time you've ever done a show and you show up and something goes wrong and then suddenly you've made yourself terrified for any show that you're going to do.
Mm.
um, know that there is always going to be that terror of going on stage, and that's part of just being performing something live is that's kind of the whole point, is something could go wrong at any point, but the more you do it the kind of better you get at it and the more comfortable you sort of get at that.
Yeah, I was listening to, I don't know if you're familiar with Chris Rock. He's a comedian, and he
Hmm.
was talking about how, being nervous is a symptom of like kind of actually having respect or care for the thing. You want it to go well, and you know that it may not. And so you can't really control, but you're going to do your best to prepare because it matters to you.
Yeah, no, I definitely resonate with that, and I think the nervousness is important. Like I would kind of almost be more worried if the nervousness wasn't there, because then that to me
Mhm.
that sort of shows to Chris Rock's sentiment like kind of a lack of interest when it gets to that point where you're just kind of walking on stage and like, oh whatever, this I'm just going to do this thing. There's this sort of stakes have gone, and that again is really the difference between live and in studios. There's just a little bit more stakes, and that's what makes it fun and exciting.
What scares you about making music and or performing?
Nothing really anymore. I think I've been making music long enough that I've kind of gotten over any of that. But I know definitely in the past the kind of usual culprits of, are people going to like this? Are people going to listen to this and be like, what is this weird crap? The kind of usual sort of imposter syndrome of things, of like, well, I've made this thing and I kind of like it, but is everyone else going to think it's weird and they're not going to like it? Or
Mm.
like in a live performance context, is everybody going to be bored? Or are people going to be just like chatting amongst themselves? Yeah, I think just from my experience over the years, I've had all of those things happen and kind of been fine. It's happened enough that I've gotten to the point where it's like, cool. I know that happens before, and I don't die, and it's all good,
Mhm.
and I move on, and it's a bit awkward in the moment, but yeah. So I think I've had the luxury of being able to kind of get through those fears and experience them, but I've definitely had those in the past in a big way. I'm sure. I think just kind of knowing, if you're somebody who maybe hasn't had those, just knowing that those things are going to happen. You're gonna play a gig, as one of the bands I play with calls them. You're going to play a soul crusher, where there's two people in the crowd and one of them is the sound engineer, and you're going to be fine. And yeah, and it's just part of the gig.
I've never heard that term soul crusher. I love that, man. I'm definitely going to remember that.
Yeah, I've played my fair share of soul crushers, but again, I think like if there's always going to be a degree of like, you're doing this for yourself. If I'm up on stage and there's one person in the crowd, well, if there's one person in the crowd, I'm going to give that one person a hang of a show and they're going to have a great time. But also, like, I'm going to have a great time because I love doing it. I love playing music. And
What have you learned from playing soul crushers?
I think the biggest learning is that it's totally fine, and it happens and you'll be okay. But I think the other biggest learning is that it's as much about you having a good time on stage and enjoying yourself and having fun doing the thing as it is the audience. So of course there's that relationship with the audience. But if you look like you're not having fun on stage, the audience is not going to have fun.
Mm.
So when there's no one there, that's a good time to be really focused on, because you've got no one else there to make sure they're entertained. It's like, cool, let's focus on, are we having a good time? Yeah, we're having a good time. We're good. Unfortunately for me, like, I think all of the soul crushes that I've played before have been in bands. So I've had the luxury of like having other people there to be like, well, that was awkward, but we had a good time and we all
Yeah.
laughed about it. I don't think I've ever played a solo gig where it was a soul crusher. But yeah, even so, it'd be like, cool, I'm gonna have a good time. I'm here to do the thing that I love doing, and yeah. So that's probably a good takeaway from the soul crushes.
Did you ever experience that moment of like of wanting to give up after having a show that nobody shows up to?
Yeah, definitely. There's definitely the moment. There's always the kind of moment of like, gosh, well, like, why are we doing it? We've just lost a bunch of money on this gig because we've
Mm.
had to travel to the venue or pay venue hire, whatever. Like, why are we doing this? And then you have the next gig, and there's more people there. Maybe if you do it in 100 gigs, there's one person there, you need to change something. But yeah, there's always going to be that, why are we doing this kind of thing? And I think that just helps you sort of refocus,
Mm.
and think, well, why are we doing this? First of all, is it because we just enjoy it and we have fun? Then it doesn't matter if there's one person there. Are we doing it because we want to make a career out of it? Well, then maybe we need to market the gig better, and you sort of use those as learning experiences to figure out, well, what went wrong? Why was there only one person at this gig? Was it because we didn't advertise it very well? Or was it because it was in some weird town where there's only one person who listens to music, kind of thing? So you've got to kind of look at it as a learning experience, and figure out what you can take away from it.
It sounds like, it's don't let any one experience, whether it's positive or negative, be too informative to your overall decision about how you do things.
Oh yeah, definitely. Because on the flip side, I've had gigs that are like amazing, incredible gigs, and the energy's great, and everyone loves it. And you think, this is it. This is the moment. I've made it. Like, everyone loves this. And then you play your next gig to 2 people, and you're like, oh no, I didn't make it. It was just whatever happened that night. I remember there was this one gig that I played with the venue was just totally packed. I don't know what was happening that night. The energy was great. We played an amazing set. Everybody loved it. And then we had exactly that. Like, the next gig that we played, there were like 5-10 people there. It's like, oh well, what happened the other night that there was this magic? And just sometimes that happens.
Have you always aspired to have an online business around music?
No, not at all. It was definitely a lot of what I've done with my career has been very accidental. So with ELPHNT itself, the way ELPHNT started was, and it's kind of still the way sort of that I run ELPHNT today, is it was always something for me first. So any of the tools that I make, any of the like video tutorials that I make, it always comes from something that's for me first. If the tool, it's a tool that I want to use in my own making, in my own music making. If it's a video about a technique or something, it's probably some technique that I've like developed for myself or figured out for myself and then turned it into a video. So ELPHNT itself as a kind of business basically started because I made it was a drum synth in Ableton Live because I wanted one for myself. I was learning about synthesis at that point. I was like, drum synthesis sounds interesting. Let me try and do this. And I built myself a little drum synth. I was like, oh, this is cool. Why don't I like share this online? Put it up online, and I think I put it up for free. And suddenly people were downloading, and I was like, oh, that's interesting. People are downloading it. And I think I'd made it it was like a pay what you want kind of thing. And there were people paying. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, people are actually paying for this thing. Maybe I could put a little bit more effort into it and polish it up, and maybe then next time it won't be free, and I'll sell it. And it just kind of built from there. And then the next time I built a tool that was something that I wanted for myself, it was like, cool, okay, now I can share that with this audience that I've started building. And just over time, it kind of grew organically into, what it is today. The trick with that, though, for me then becomes trying to keep it as something that comes from me first. Because it's very easy to kind of fall into the trap of like, oh, cool, like I could do this thing because I know that this thing's going to sell well, or a lot of people are going to download it, but it's not necessarily something for me. And that I try and avoid at all costs. I always want to kind of keep it as something organic, something natural, something comes from what I want to need in my own music making.
Hey, real quick, if you're enjoying this episode, take a second and hit that subscribe button. Remember, Producer Head grows thanks to listeners and supporters like you. So if something here resonates, take a second to let us know by following, liking, subscribing. Your support means everything. By subscribing and sharing, you help us grow the Producer Head community, which allows us to continue bringing you incredible conversations just like this one, and opens the door to even more exciting guests in the future. Let's keep building this together. All right, back to the episode.
Yeah, no, it's really cool to hear that. I mean, as you mentioned earlier, that your version of the oblique cards, is something that you actually do use in your own process. Right? It's really cool to hear. So for those listening who are kind of maybe they've already started, maybe they're thinking about starting some sort of experiment to see what they can do to turn their own sort of venture into a business. What kind of skills, in your experience have been helpful, or attitudes have been helpful to kind of embrace and develop?
I mean, I think on a technical and just practical level, um, running your own business, you're definitely going to need to get into the weeds of some technical stuff. I mean, it is. There's so many different ways to do it these days. Like you could literally just have an Instagram profile and sell things these days, and that could be all. But you're going to need to develop some kind of technical skills, like how do I set up an online store or a website, or how do I grow an email list. There's some like very kind of practical things that you're going to need to just spend a bit of time learning. And those are things that you can just kind of do some research upfront and look at. There are hundreds of thousands of guides, I'm sure, about starting an online business where you can look up what are the things that I need to learn and need to know and have from the start, or it's just something that you can kind of, and that's very much how I did it, was pick it up along the way as things come up. You sort of think like, oh, I've got all these people who are downloading my pack. Maybe I should like put them on an email list so I could contact them. And then you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to research email lists and that sort of thing. So there's definitely that sort of very practical, technical side of things that you might need to learn. And it'll be different depending on how you want to approach things. As I said, even if maybe your business is just selling stuff on Instagram, for example, you're still going to need to figure out the sort of technical ins and outs of how does it work? How do I create a product and get it on Instagram? And how do I then market that to people and that sort of thing? But then on a more kind of open-ended sort of level, I think what comes into that as well is just being willing to be like a bit flexible and kind of follow the direction of different things. I know, like, since I started doing this, the way that the internet works and the way that online business works has changed a lot. So needing to be able to adapt and kind of see where trends are going in music technology, being able to see like what are the kinds of things that people need and people are interested in. Do people need another compressor? Probably not. Do they need some kind of interesting sample pack or sound pack? Yeah, maybe they do. There's some kind of demand for that. So being able to just kind of look at what people are after as well and just being aware of that sort of thing is quite important. Um, like for me, I've had the great benefit of like the dual kind of thing of what I do of teaching and creating content. Is where I get my best ideas for content is when I'm teaching people, because then I see the kinds of things that people need. It's really easy to do a lesson with somebody and see, oh, this person just needs some more synth presets. Let me make a pack of synth presets. That sounds kind of cool.
Yeah, 100%. And I guess, if you were starting now, or if you were to start again, based on your experience, are there things that you would do differently at all, or would you run it all back?
Well, I mean, I would probably implement everything that I know now from the get go, as opposed to learning it all gradually. So there's definitely lots of very practical things that I would do. Like one thing would be start an email list right away. Um, and there are like hundreds of those little things that we can go into if you want to, but that feels like maybe a different kind of discussion and probably something you can find in an article somewhere as well. I think, yeah, just sort of thinking in terms of the bigger picture, I think I'd have a much clearer vision of what exactly it is that I want. Well, because now I do have a much clearer vision of what it is that I want to do. Whereas over the years, I've like experimented with different things, let me try making a sample pack. That doesn't quite feel right. I'm not going to make any more sample packs. I'll focus on this kind of thing. Or let me try do a tutorial video in this way. Nah, that doesn't really feel natural. So there's been like a lots of sort of experimentation, I think. Yeah, there's definitely kind of elements of like just what I know now I would sort of implement. But at the same time, I think it's really important to go through those steps and try things and figure out what doesn't work. So if I was starting like something totally new that had nothing to do with music production, there are definitely some basic learnings that I would take from what I've done here, but I would definitely let myself kind of experiment and learn and try things and figure out what works for me in that kind of different domain, so to speak. So I think, again, for anybody else wanting to start some kind of online business or something similar, you need to figure out what works for you.
Yeah, to what extent does your business look the way you imagined when you started?
Oh, nothing at all.
Mm.
Totally different. I mean, in the sense that like it's focused around Ableton and music production, yeah. But in terms of like the stuff that I spend my time on day to day, and yeah, very different to what I thought or maybe hoped it would be. But yeah, in a good way, in unexpected and kind of interesting ways.
To what extent do you think shortcuts exist? You know, even knowing what you know now, could you have skipped over all of that experimentation, trying different things, and just arrived at where you are?
I want to say no. I think there are definitely things that will speed up the process, but like a kind of a pure shortcut where it's like, let me get from A straight to B, definitely not. But maybe let me get from A to B a little bit quicker. Yeah, there are definitely things like that along the way.
How do you think about balancing, or how do you balance your time between, your own music and your creates, and just like being able to make music for you that maybe you're going to play at a show or release an album or a single, as well as kind of all of the business demands that now exist?
For me, that kind of comes in waves because I sort of go through periods just generally in life where I'm feeling more or less creatively inclined towards music, and it's very different. Sort of triggers very different parts of my brain, like creating music to creating kind of content and packs and sounds and things. So yeah, it'll go in phases. There might be a phase where it's like I'm making a lot of music and really kind of focusing on that side of being creative. And then what will inevitably happen is that that will inspire a bunch of ideas for like, oh, here's the thing that I want to create that will be really cool. And here's another thing I want to create. And then I'll get to a point where it's like, cool, now I'm going to sit down and kind of create a bunch of tools or and I think it's kind of been to my own detriment because maybe one piece of advice that I would give to people creating content is consistency is definitely kind of key. And so I know for myself, it's something I'm very bad at. Because of this, I'll like have a period where I'll have a whole bunch of new tools and new tutorials and a bunch of videos and then like nothing for like 6 months and then
Mm.
a whole bunch of things in one kind of concentrated period. So that's something I'm not particularly good at. So as a piece of advice, I'd recommend to people to try and be a bit more consistent. But it's just kind of the way that I work, and so I've just sort of lent with it. I lent into it. But so yeah, so that's generally how it works for me. Is kind of balancing and thinking, almost thinking of it like kind of seasonally, if you will, where it's like this part of the year is for tools and videos and teaching, and this part of the year is for creating and making music. And there's a little bit of bleed between them, but for the most part, that's sort of how it works.
Yeah, I mean, I think there is a lot of wisdom in what you just described, which is to kind of maybe not try to impose your will on everything and to kind of understand, like when you zoom out a little bit, you may kind of notice patterns and that there's like a more natural rhythm to the way that you work and the way that things happen for you. And to maybe just allow things to go that way is can make things a little bit more fun and maybe even more productive at the same time.
Well, I think yeah, that's a really important point. Is I think the way that I've worked the way that I do now is I have tried the other approach in
Mm.
the past where because it is the advice that you get about running an online business is consistency is key. You got to be posting stuff and creating stuff all the time. And I've tried that and hated it. And I'm like, well, why am I going to do this if I'm miserable and not having a good time? So there is a part of that where, and I guess it's just a trade off that you make. Is I've at some point kind of decided like I'm probably gonna make a little bit less money than I might make if I'm running my business in a certain way, but I'm gonna feel better about it. I'm gonna kind of have a more kind of balanced lifestyle and all that sort of stuff, and
Mm.
that works for me. And at the end of the day, I think that's for me has been the best thing about running my own business is that kind of freedom and flexibility to do something that just really works for me. And if that's not happening, then I got to change it.
I'm sure I speak for many people listening when I say, tons of respect for what it is that you built. It's really cool from the outside, and I'm also, without a doubt, there's a lot of work behind it for it to run the way that it does and for it to look and sound the way that it does. So congratulations, Steve.
Thanks, man. Thank you very much.
And for balance, I do just want to say, can you also speak on, just the inherent value of music, making music as part of your life, and that it doesn't just, I feel like there's also a lot of messaging that makes everybody feel like if you don't have monthly listeners, or if you don't, followers, that, your music isn't valid or that it's not a worthwhile thing. And so I think that's a real kind of part of this time.
Yeah, I mean, to speak to the sort of value of music, to me at least, like to me, music is everything.
Mm.
I from a young age, that has been my kind of purpose, if you will, is music. And I've sort of always known that for me is, um, yeah, it's always been music. I think the thing for me that's been really interesting to learn is when I was younger, I had a particular vision of what that would be. For me, that was going to be, well, first I was going to be a drummer in a rock band, and then I was going to be a drummer that was like a studio drummer, and then I wanted to be like a music producer. But I think the really important thing for me is that I've learned over the years is just being willing to accept and kind of go with what comes up. Like I said, this sort of ELPHNT itself is almost entirely an accident. It just kind of happened by accident that I've ended up creating content online and making tools and things. And I really enjoy it. So just letting myself kind of follow things that come up and not being too strict about like, no, this was the thing that I wanted, so I must stick to this path. That sort of has worked kind of really well for me. And then to your other point, yeah, I mean, it's I think it's something that everybody struggles with, and I know I've struggled with a lot as well. Is there's very much this external pressure, and I think it's just a thing on the internet that you have to have X amount of listeners or X amount of plays for your music to be worthwhile. And again, I think this is something that I've had the benefit of learning from students that I've taught. I'm sure this is something that everyone who teaches has the experience of. Like teaching is also learning. I learn so much from the people that I work with when I teach. But so many people that I've taught, probably the vast majority of the people that I do kind of lessons with are people who don't do music for a living. They do music, they have some other kind of day job and they do it for fun. And for them, it's not how many plays do I have on SoundCloud? How many people are listening? It's like, I'm doing this because I enjoy it. It's like watching TV or playing video games. It's like, oh, it's just this thing that brings me joy and I love doing it. And so seeing that with people and just kind of knowing that, yeah, that's totally fine. If I do this thing because I love doing it. So like for myself, I put out an album at the beginning of last year, like April last year, I think I put out an album. And to this day, I don't think I've got more than a couple hundred listens on the album. I didn't do a particularly good job of promoting it or really sharing it about because the point of the album wasn't really for that. It's something that I've wanted to do for a really long time where I've wanted to put out, I've had this idea of this kind of album that I wanted to put together. And it was mostly just for me. And at the end of the day, when I sat down and like I finished it and I hit the button, I put it out, that was it. I was done. There was nothing. I didn't need to get a whole bunch of listens. I didn't need to sell a bunch of copies or get a bunch of streams on Spotify or whatever it was. In a way, like releasing it kind of felt redundant. It was like, no, I finished this thing and it was for me. And that felt really good. So I think just kind of coming back to why are you doing the thing that you're doing, in this case, making music? If it's for getting a bunch of streams, you can't really guarantee that outcome. You can definitely work like, and like there's nothing to say that that's like the wrong goal to have. Like definitely something to work towards. But I think there needs to be something more inherent of like I'm doing this because I love it. And if you don't, and then yeah, maybe do something do something else.
Where do you see that dividing line between what you can control and what you can't control?
It's a real deep question. I think I guess you can kind of set that line wherever you want to set it. I think you sort of decide what is just within my grasp and what am I gonna just feel good about I can control and what am I gonna just let go of. And in letting go of it, it's not saying like, well, I'm just gonna forget about it. Like for me in my example of my album, I was like, I couldn't be bothered to like promote this album. I did it for myself, whatever, that's fine. I'm not trying to like have some big album. But if it is something that you want, like, yeah, put in the effort and do some promotion and play gigs and play shows and put in the effort, but go in knowing that, especially in the music industry, because it is so competitive, go in knowing that it might not work out and that's fine. That's like totally fine. As long as if you get some joy and fun out of it, then that's what counts.
Where does confidence come from?
Experience, definitely, just experience. Going back to what we were saying about when you asked about kind of fears earlier and fears that I have, I feel like the reason I have, and I definitely still have fears about things, but the reasons I have less fears about things in music is because I've experienced them all. I've played the Soul Crusher gigs and I was fine, and I've put out a track that no one listened to and like I was fine. So I think confidence just purely comes from experience, both on a practical level of like when you've played thousands of shows, then you can be confident that you have the skill to like do the show and it's going to kind of go fine. But also when you've done 100 terrible shows, you can have another terrible show and know that that's going to be fine. You'll be okay.
I don't know if anybody gets to live life without playing Soul Crushers if they want to play live shows. That
Oh yeah.
it's like a rite of passage, and I think that's like one of those things. Instead of taking it as a piece of discouragement, you can say, "Oh, I'm really on the path of doing this because I've experienced the pain that comes along with doing it."
Yeah, exactly. It's just part of the journey.
Yeah.
And it's also really makes really good stories. I know when I sit with other musicians who played live, we share our Soul Crusher stories and we laugh about them, and it's a good time.
Yeah, I love that term so much. I don't know if it's like specifically a British thing or I've never heard that, but I love it and I'm going to use it from here on out. So thank you for that. I have some of these quick hits for you, but before we get into that, I just want to say, are there any projects that you do want to highlight or share, things that are upcoming?
I mean, for me, it's always just checking out my website for anything that I might be doing. Going to ELPHNT.io is always a good place to start because most of what I sort of do kind of stems from there. Worth checking out if anyone's interested is I'm currently involved with another project called Human Bean Juice, which I'm having loads of fun with. I'm a friend who plays bass and guitar, and I play drums, and it's the genre is arcade funk. So if you imagine kind of video game music and funk music mashed together, we've been gigging that, and we're kind of writing a bunch of music. So there's a bunch of tracks that are on Spotify and all the usual places. If you're into that sort of thing, check that out.
Very cool.
If anyone is interested, this is the most promotion I've done for it, but you can go check out the album that I put out last year. That I put that out under a different name. It was under the name Console, Console, except the L is like a /, and that's on Spotify and Bandcamp. But again, you'll find that via like any of the ELPHNT stuff. I always kind of link out to all the things that I'm doing from there. I'm in the season now of the like creating content and creating packs, and I'm hoping to get back to the season of creating music again soon. So hopefully there'll be some more console music as well.
Very cool. And we will certainly link all of this in the show notes for everybody listening. But ELPHNT.io, ELPHNT, ELPHNT, find everything this man's doing. And are you currently accepting students?
I am actually, yeah. Again, you'll find that on the ELPHNT website. There's a page on there for private lessons. There's like a tab that says Learn Ableton, and then below that is private lessons. Yeah.
Got you. So for anybody listening, if you're interested, ELPHNT.io is where you want to be. And with that, let's jump into these quick hits. Which DAW do you use?
Ableton Live.
3 favorite albums. Sounds like maybe we already know at least one of them.
It's really tricky. It changes a lot, but I'm actually going to leave. I'll leave Love Supreme out of it. Well, so Cosmogrammer I mentioned earlier is definitely, that one's always in there. Probably Mad Villainy by Mad Villain, and then Songs for the Deaf by Queens of the Stone Age.
Wow. Best music-related purchase you've made for $100 or less?
Earplugs, molded earplugs for when you're out at gigs. That is one thing that most musicians do not do, and you really should do, because the amount of money that'll save you in the long term when your hearing goes is earplugs. Best musical purchase you can make.
Yeah, man. For everybody if everyone going to shows and not wearing earplugs, come on. I mean, please, just do yourself a favor. Something you bought and never used.
Almost every single VST plugin I've ever bought. I don't use a lot of plugins. I mostly only use native stuff. I've been tempted so many times in the past by a cool looking plugin. I'm like, this looks fun. Let me buy this, and then I never use it.
What's your favorite or most used Ableton plugin?
Ooh, that's tricky. I mean, not to just promote my own stuff, but it is probably my most used is either Inspire, the one I mentioned earlier, the kind of oblique cards thing, or I released a pack a little while back called Essentials, and in that there's a device called Color, which is like a distortion device. It's got like models of tube and tape and all that sort of thing, and that goes on like absolutely everything.
One habit that gets in the way of your music.
I don't know if this counts as a habit, but procrastination in general is is something that I'm bad at, and that takes many forms. Probably playing video games ends up happening a lot, but just like scrolling on the internet and watching YouTube videos and just doing distracting things. It's a very bad habit that I have.
Something you wish more people understood about music and or production.
Well, I think we've spoken about it quite a bit already. So if you haven't picked up on this, just to nail the message home, is practice.
Mm.
There's no such thing as a quick tip. There are some quick tips that are useful, but the only way to get better is to just practice and put in some time.
And to buy all of the ELPHNT devices that exist out there on the market.
Yeah, that'll take you from being a beginner music maker to like an expert just right then.
Overnight.
Yeah, exactly.
You heard it here. Favorite movie?
Probably 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Advice that you received and found useful.
Does reading in a book count as receiving it? I guess I received it from the author.
Sure.
Less is more is that's advice that I live by.
What book does that come from for you?
There's a great book that I read called Essentialism by Greg McKeown. But the actual phrase I think was coined or said. I'm sure it was said by somebody else before, but Dieter Rams is a designer, and he's generally regarded as the person who said less is more.
Do you have a favorite book or a book that you recommend to people learning music production or people who are artists?
Well, for music production and people who are artists, you can see it on my shelf just behind me there. It is a book called 74 Creative Strategies. It's by this guy called Dennis DeSantis, who he actually wrote the user manual for Ableton. He's a very cool dude. But he put out this book. I think it's 74. I can't remember the exact number, but it's like 74 creative strategies. And it's broken down into these 3 sections of problems of beginning, problems of like continuing, or I can't remember what the middle term is, and then problems of finishing. And it's not the kind of book that you like read from beginning to end, but the reason it sits on my shelf behind me is like when I'm making music, I can just grab it when I'm stuck. If I'm stuck in the middle section, open it to a random page of problems of progressing. That's what it is, problems of progressing. And it just gives you like a little useful technique or tip to kind of try. So really great book I'd recommend for any kind of music producer.
That's another version of oblique cards, it sounds like. You're inspired.
Yeah, it's definitely the concept is very similar to the oblique cards kind of idea.
Very cool. What character from a book, movie, show do you most identify with?
Jake the dog from Adventure Time, who's also on my shelf behind me over there.
Okay, and I would like to ask you to leave a question for the next guest, not knowing who it will be, and I will ask them.
Ooh. So I think everybody always, like a common kind of question is like, if you could go back in time and tell yourself one thing, like what would you tell yourself? I'm going to flip that around and say, if you could go forward in time and tell your future self one thing to like remember or to hold on to or not forget to do, what would that be?
That's a really cool flip. I enjoy that. And the question that was left for you from the previous guest, if likes, metrics, etc. didn't exist, what kind of music would you make?
Probably the same kind of music I'm making now, because I try very hard not to pay attention to that anyway, as we said a little bit earlier. So yeah, I imagine probably much the same.
Yeah, and I got to say, I believe you. I believe you.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, man, that brings us to the end. Is there anything else that you'd like to say, people listening?
I mean, yeah, just keep doing it. If you love it, keep doing it. You'll get better at it the more time you put into it, and do it because you love it. And if you love it, then it's pretty easy to just keep doing it.
Cheers to that. And yeah, man, thank you so much for the time and for being so generous with your experience. All of the things, pulling back the curtain a little bit on your business, creativity, teaching, your enthusiasm, man. And I don't know, just like your love for music is so deep. So thank you so much for sharing it.
Thank you so much for having me and for all the great questions.
Appreciate that, man. Everybody, this has been Toru, and in a way, so are you. This concludes another episode of Producer Head. We will catch you next time. Peace.
Ciao.
That's it for my conversation with ELPHNT. The insights he shared on everything from the importance of organization to the value of playing soul crusher gigs, which is a term I will now never forget, remind us that mastery comes through dedication and practice. If you're looking to dive deeper into Ableton Live or explore innovative tools, definitely check out everything he's doing over at ELPHNT.io. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share with a friend, and leave a rating and review wherever you're listening. This helps Producer Head find its place and its people. Without you, there is no Producer Head. Thanks again for tuning into Producer Head. Subscribe and join our community over at producerhead.substack.com so you never miss an episode. Substack subscribers receive exclusive access to the bi-weekly podium, a curation of my favorite discoveries on and offline over the past week. You'll also get access to Producer Head Bars, where I share the best of what's been shared with me to help you and other producers in our community grow. The podium and Producer Head bars are designed to provide immediate inspiration and direct application in your creative process. So, subscribe at producerhead.substack.com to receive real inspiration and ideas you can use to elevate your own process today. If you care for the craft, get your exclusive access at producerhead.substack.com. This episode was co-produced, engineered, and edited by Matthew Diaz. Big thank you to him from Producer Head. This is Toru, and in a way, so are you. Peace.